Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of our Scholarly Skills series. My name is Alice McLaughlin, and I am the Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Studies here at York University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on talking to the public, communicating your research to a non-academic audience. I'm very lucky to be co-hosting this webinar today with a local expert on talking to the public, whom I'll be introducing more in a little bit. But it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Kristen Andrews to join me in today's session. As you are all aware today, hi Christy, thanks for joining us. As you are all aware, today's session is virtual, which means that you may be joining us from many parts of the world. I know my co-host and I are in very different places, I think with equally cold weather, but still very different places. So I want to take a minute, as is our practice in FGS, to start by acknowledging the land on which FGS is situated, if not the land where each of us find ourselves. And maybe as I read out the land acknowledgement, you can take a minute to reflect or even turn on Google and learn a little bit about the place where you find yourself today. So York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So from whatever land, with whatever history you are joining us today, I just want to sincerely welcome you and thank you for giving us your lunch hour. As I said, it's my pleasure to introduce a co-host today. So I want to take a minute to talk to you about Kristen Andrews as our guest expert. She is York Research Chair in Animal Minds, a professor of philosophy, psychology, and cognitive science at both York University and the City University of New York in the United States, a member of the Royal Society of Canada, and president of the Southern Society for Philosophy and Psychology. Kristen is the author of multiple books in philosophy and cognitive science for both academic and popular audiences, including Do Apes Read Minds?, The Animal Mind, and How to Study Animal Minds. She is also one of the authors of Chimpanzee Rights, The Philosopher's Brief. And this is a publication that was originally submitted as an amicus curiae brief for a New York Court of Appeals, submitted to the New York Court of Appeals as part of a landmark case. She is also one of the authors of the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness. Kristen has given herself countless media and podcast interviews with figures ranging from CBC's Matt Galloway to Alan Alda on topics from the inner life of bees, the consciousness of spiders, or what your dog's opinion of you might be. She has been interviewed in print, written her own public op-eds and blog posts, and has also written for both popular and academic presses. In other words, she is exactly the person I want to be talking to today about this. And I think she's going to give you a really good sense of the pros and cons and the reasons to be an academic engaged in public scholarship. So Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Alice. I'm happy to be here and a little embarrassed by your introduction, but
I couldn't resist. You probably shouldn't have given me the opportunity. So, a brief overview of today's webinar. We're going to start by talking why you should consider talking to the public about your research, how and where to reach your audience, how to prepare, some tips and tricks for popular communication, and then I'm calling this last section, what to do when things go wonky. I have chosen wonky in particular because I'm not necessarily talking about things going wrong, but wonky means heading off curves, curving. So they could go right or wrong in a way you weren't expecting, and I thought it's a good idea to chat about that. And then, as always, we'll end with some Q&A. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Put them there, and we will field as many of them as we can at the end. Now, these slides will include some links later on, but the links will also go up in the Zoom chat. And if you're viewing this on YouTube later, you can always freeze frame to sort of figure out and Google for the link itself. But let's start by talking about why do this at all. Why should academics talk to the public about their research? Actually, maybe before I dive into me answering why, I might start by asking you, Christy, Why did you start engaging with public audiences? What led you to get involved in this aspect of academic scholarship?
Well, I did want to have a wider reach and talk to people who aren't just my colleagues in philosophy and in psychology, because I think that the implications of the research that I do, which is research into the nature of the mind and cognitive systems and relationships, and communities of animals, those sorts of things are of general interest to people. I would sit on airplanes and people next to me would ask me what I do, and I tell them, and they're like, "Oh, tell me more." So I could tell that yes, this was something that was of interest, but it's also something that I find personally valuable. I think any of us who are dedicating our lives to write a dissertation or write a book or engage in an academic career on a question, on a research question, we're doing it because we deeply care about it. Like that's why we're all there. And so we're not going to be the only one who deeply cares about this. Other people are going to care too. And those people might not be academics. They also might not understand the academic jargon that we use or know all the citations that we refer to or all the famous people that we talk about in our works. Or the famous findings. But if we learn how to talk about it to people who don't have that background, we can have wonderful conversations and we can also share something that we think is really important with others.
Yeah, I really love that. Thank you so much for that. I think I share your sense of that value and importance. And it just so happens that my research is also the sort of thing that on an airplane people can get very interested in. When someone asks me what I do in my scholarly work and I say I work on apologies, no one has nothing to say. Everyone has an apology they want to talk about, whether it's one they thought, usually it's one they thought they should have gotten and didn't, but it might be one they are trying to figure out how to give or trying to figure out how to receive, or they have thoughts on governments or corporations engaging in apologies, or they want me to tell them which ones are good and which ones are bad. But it's so interesting for those of us who can work on something that can feel very technical and very scholarly for so long to kind of come out of the bubble and realize that this matters in the world in very, significant ways. And I think that's especially true if you're working on some new sustainable energy system or some aspect of government policy or something to do with sort of chemical treatments or something like that. Like everything that we do plays a real role, and I think that's especially true at a place like York, whose entire identity and purpose is organized around the idea of socially engaged research for the public good. If the public falls out of that equation, I don't even know why we're doing what we're doing in a real
Hmm.
way. Yeah.
That's right. And it's a challenge to learn how to translate your research sometimes to a public audience. So I learned on the airplanes and, in these casual conversations I had at dinner parties and talking to family members. Just like we teach graduate students how to give their spiel in the elevator to the people who might be hiring them in the future, I think we could also do a better job teaching grad students how to give spiels to their family members at dinner table, family dinners, or the person they're sitting next to on the bus who is asking them what they're doing at York University.
I like that idea. So, as well as teaching the elevator pitch, we should have the Thanksgiving meal pitch, the public transit pitch, and maybe the stuck in an elevator with strangers pitch as well, or something like that. There's three
Exactly.
ways to do it. I really like the point you're making about access and accessibility. I always worry that when I try to talk to people, to other scholars, even about the need to be accessible, it sounds like I'm saying you have to water it down because other people aren't as smart as professors. And that's actually exactly the opposite. I think actually, the best illustration I have of this is being a parent. Now that my children talk in a completely inaccessible set of jargon to me, involving things like 6-7 and other language that I just don't understand and can't understand because I'm not in the context where it would be explained. I know that I'm not incapable of understanding language, but I don't have access to the jargon and the vernacular and the sort of set of shorthands and codes that they have built up. So I'm never going to get it. And learning how to translate out of your own in-group's jargon and vernacular is so important. And when that in-group comes with the title of, academic or ivory tower next to it, we can sometimes think that it's because we're so very clever and smart, but that's obviously not. It's just in-group behavior. And I think it can be
Yeah.
really important to make that accessible beyond the in-group.
Exactly. But I also think that it helps you as a scholar to be able to articulate your views in an accessible way, because sometimes we rely too heavily on the jargon and on the things others have done in the past and forget that we need to understand in a deep sense those jargony terms that we're using. So yeah, I think it's a really nice exercise for anyone, even if you're not interested in talking to the public, to think about how you can translate what you're doing into words that don't involve the jargon at all. I have
Yeah.
sometimes been asked, "Oh, what does that word mean?" I'm like, "Oh, good question.
I know.
Let me think
It's a
about that."
slightly terrifying question. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, actually, as you'll see on the last point on the slide, benefits to your work. I think we have to be careful not to think of public scholarship as something we're doing sort of generously out of beneficence and the good of our own hearts. There is a very real benefit. It forces you to work on your clarity, to work on precision, to write without assistance. Hannah Arendt actually talked about like thinking without banisters, of holding on to big figures and ideas. And I think this forces us to write without the banisters. You can't hold on to the railings of jargon and assumptions and drawing on the literature and all those things. You just have to say your idea in a way that is clear, comprehensible, and persuasive. And then you have to find evidence that's accessible to everyone to explain why people should believe you. And that's an incredible intellectual task and one that challenges me all the time.
That's right.
And also, speaking of challenges, I mean, I think if you want to make sure your ideas stand the test of time, or your discoveries, or your case for what you believe, whether that is the value of a new treatment plant, or the value of a particular approach to politics, or the value of a particular kind of art, it has to be able to withstand challenge. And you'll get a wider range of challenges from a wider range of perspectives if you go beyond people who have had training that is relevantly like yours, I think, as well. Yeah.
That's true. And I mean, I guess it's kind of jumping around on the slide a little bit, but talking about the relationship to advocacy and citizenship here, when we think we've got some information or some findings or a new way of thinking about things that's going to be valuable to the larger society, we need to make it accessible. We need to deeply understand what we mean to begin with. And then we can yeah, share this in a way that can and talk to people in a way and talk to the right kind of people that could help make changes to policy, changes to the way in which, maybe we're using language, changing to the ways in which we are, distributing our resources as a community or a country. And so a lot of my work on animal cognition does have implications for policy, for things like animal welfare policy. And I'm sure we'll get to this in a minute, but when you see something in the news that relates to your research, like when I was reading about the beluga whales at Marineland, earlier this fall, I thought this is a perfect opportunity for me to contact a newspaper or something and offer an opinion on this because I know something about captivity and beluga whales and the cognition and what is good for these animals and can engage in that conversation as well. So your expertise is something that actually is really needed at some point when events happen where you can contribute. So you can
No, I
engage
really
in public
appreciate
debate
that.
and citizenship by advocating for the things you think are right, given your expertise.
I think that's so important, and I think it's also important for those of us at public universities, and like every Canadian university is a public university, and I don't. I think it's important to recognize the freedom we have as scholars to sort of pursue knowledge and create knowledge in the way we best understand it and see it suited. But at the same time, we are at York, we're part of a suite of public universities in Ontario that were created in the 50s and 60s for the public good. And I think that sense of our scholarship leading towards the public good is very important and sort of can't be forgotten in these ways. So yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, I think hopefully we've persuaded everyone this is something they should think about doing. Let's talk about how and where they can do it. So on the next slide, I've tried to list all the various ways in which you could sort of think about engaging in public scholarship. And it's a long list because there are lots of them. And when I was thinking about what I would say, and obviously we want to hear more from you, Kristen, but how to choose which one, I found myself thinking, well, what's your overall aim? Is the goal to have a conversation, to sort of figure out how to tell a particular kind of story, to make a particular point, to sort of like chime in on something, or to start to create a public profile as a scholar and a voice or something like that? So, and so given those aims, you might pick different ones. But I'm just curious for you, when you talk to your graduate students or early career scholars, what do you say? Where's a good place to start if you're looking to reach a public audience?
So I think certainly writing a letter to the editor in a newspaper is a really good way to start. These are often, um, very timely sorts of, you'd be writing on a very timely event. So if you see something happening in the news, you can write that letter. And if it's, if they haven't been bombarded with letters on the topic, you have a really good shot of getting a publication there. And then it's something that you could then develop into writing opinion pieces that you first would often have to pitch to news organizations, magazines, um, and online magazines. Um, but to have some sort of a track record before you have to pitch something to a magazine editor, a letter to the editor of a newspaper is a really good place to start.
What are the benefits of going that route, a letter to the editor versus, I mean, it seems to me that sort of everyone these days is starting their own Substack. And I don't quite understand why that's not a blog, but I understand that it's not. So I'm just sort of accepting that I'm old. But sort of because there are lots of platforms now where you can just start writing. If it's short, you can do it on Blue Sky or X or something like that. If it's longer, you can do it on Substack. But is there still, would you say there's value to sort of looking for a the sort of institutional media outlet to start to have a track record there as well? Should you be doing both?
I think that there's value to that because these are publications that are still read very widely. And if you create a Substack and you're not known, your voice isn't known, and you don't have followers, then you're not going to be reaching an audience. So I think that the first thing to do is to think about how to build a public persona. Another way to do this, of course, is to have a website to begin with. And then once you have a website, people can find you when they Google you, and then you put links to the kind of traditional media places where you're publishing, and that gives you a certain level of credibility. With that level of credibility, you can, create a Substack. I know a lot of people get very well known just from posting on social media like X and Blue Sky. Um, in academia. So certainly that is another good place to start. I think that the ecosystem is a little bit different than it was when I was first on Twitter and getting thousands of followers very quickly, posting things. The algorithms have changed, and people are engaging with some of those social media platforms, I think, a little bit differently now. So I don't have expertise on the state of the art at this very moment on social media. And so I have been encouraging my own students to do things like, for your first, step outside of maybe local newspapers, is pitching something to an online magazine that would be appropriate in your field, something that you've read papers from, or public, articles that are related to your work that you find fun and enjoyable, and writing to them with an idea to pitch that. Because if you can get an editor interested in what you're doing, then you also sometimes get to work with an editor to develop a piece in a way that teaches you how to write for the public as well. So they and they might give you a couple $100s too, even if you're writing for a magazine. But that can be a really wonderful experience. I think it helps to have a kind of track record in order to get those pitches accepted.
That's really good advice. That's really helpful. This may be too general to be able to say anything particularly helpful, but do you have advice about the sort of risks or benefits of, for example, written versus video or short form versus long form? Like, I always think, oh, public public scholarship means writing a short piece for a venue or something like that. My tendency is to always think of written, and my tendency is to always think long, not in the sense of academic long, but sort of 3 to 4 paragraphs or something like that. But I recognize that the world is shifting towards sort of very short, sort of social media style pieces. And then also there's a lot of attention on video and video pieces as well. Do you have thoughts about where students should be looking or thinking?
Yeah, I think it's probably really going to depend on the field and where you see um, what you're reading, what you're listening to, what you're looking at, what's capturing your attention and your peers' attention and your professor's attention. And that's the place that you would, I think, probably want to aim for. So, for example, in philosophy, we ha still have a lot of podcasts, and these are
Yeah.
video and auditory podcasts. And these are also great ways to present your research to maybe a broader kind of philosophical audience, not always getting outside of the field, but still a little bit of public outreach. These are great for practice and also for building a public profile as well. You can reach out to people in philosophy, like our students could reach out to people who are doing podcasts that they watch and saying, "Hey, you want to talk to me about my research? It's really cool. It could be really fun." So yeah, I would say it's probably very specific field by field, but think about what's capturing your attention and then reaching out and offering yourself up to people who are doing things. And I guess another thing I would add is don't be afraid to reach out to people who
Yeah.
are your favorite podcasters or TikTokers who are doing short form interviews, because they will be delighted to have your content and delighted to talk to you and because they're very often like scrambling and looking for people to talk to. And if you're enthusiastic about your research, they're going to be very happy to have you on.
Yeah. And I think the more you can convey, this is why I am, people have these stereotypes of academics as being sort of fussy and dry and inaccessible and boring. And I think if you can present yourself as someone who is none of those, you're going to find that you are an appealing person for people to talk to, as long as you can also show that you are informed, clear, and knowledgeable. Being lively and interesting can't hurt.
Yeah,
I wanted
I
to,
think
yeah,
showing
sorry, go ahead.
excitement is really important when you're
Yeah.
doing anything video or audio. Um, and however you do that, like people can show enthusiasm lots of different ways, but that's going to resonate. It's a good, just a little t
Yeah.
one of the little tips.
Emotional contagion is real, even through a
Yes.
screen. Absolutely. I actually wanted to just draw attention to the last few on here. I think many on this list are very familiar to anyone who's thinking, how do I reach the public? We know to turn to traditional media, we know to turn to online and social media. I want to make a pitch for going local as well. I have had a lot less experience than you have, sort of doing public scholarship in the sort of global sense or sort of national sense, but I have had a lot of fun giving talks to public audiences. So, public libraries, churches, other religious organizations, community groups, professional organizations. They are also often looking for people to come and give talks. And this is just a really wonderful way to practice all the things we were talking about and that we'll tell you about in a minute, all the tips and tricks. But it's also a great way to get feedback on what your public scholarship is like. And you also never know who is going to be in the audience. And you may find that that is actually a good route to the next step to a longer audience. So keep an eye out for possible artistic or other community collaborations. Even going to schools is a possibility. But definitely looking in Toronto for Toronto Public Library, other kinds of events. I've given talks at the AGO that have been a lot of fun. Just keep that in mind. And again, you have to sort of have the courage to ask, and that will, as so much of academic life does, involve being able to hear no, which can hurt, but it only hurts. It hurts the most the first 5 times you hear it, and it gets better after that. And I think that can lead places as well.
Yeah, I agree. I've had a really, really nice time talking to local communities in Toronto, like naturalist clubs and people who are interested in, bird watchers, like all kinds of small groups and communities have reached out to talk to me, asked me to talk to them, and I'm always really happy to do that. It's really fun. But you also might want to like join these sorts of organizations and go and hear the talks that other people are giving. And then you could go and introduce yourself to the organizers and say, hey, I work on this and maybe you'd like to hear this. Becoming parts of those communities in Toronto outside of academia can also just be a really nice hobby and a good way to meet people.
Yeah.
But also then give you an opportunity to share your work more broadly in those communities.
And I suppose that also makes a good point, which is for this skill, as with any skill, one of the best ways to learn it is find people who are doing it in a way that you really admire and watch or listen and learn from them. Like that's
Mm.
always going to be the way to do it. I have certainly
Mhm.
watched lots of your videos, Kristen. So I'm going to assume I have popular press publishing at the bottom. I sort of feel like there's not too much to say about that because I think that sort of follows from the others. I imagine that's one of the hardest things to break into. Book publishing or any kind of monograph publishing is very competitive. And I imagine it's once you would need to establish a track record at a number of these other venues before that would be an option. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think that reaching out to a popular press and saying, "Hi, I have an idea for a trade book that's going to show up in Indigo," is probably not the best use of
Higher
anybody's
reach,
time.
higher lift
Yeah,
than all of the
yeah,
others. Yeah.
and because the way these things work is that they end up the presses come to you later when you've got a public profile, and they say,
Yeah.
"Are you thinking about a book?" And then that conversation starts. They start the conversation really. Book
Fair enough.
publishing is a pretty protective field.
Yeah, that makes
Trade
sense.
books, academic books are very different. University
Well,
press, so on.
maybe we'll have you back on to talk about that another time too. We'll just keep dragging you back. All right. So let's say you've found your way. Let's talk a little bit about how you prepare to go public. So, one question I have is how to choose what to write about. And you kind of hinted at this a little bit when you were talking about the beluga whales earlier, but presumably you don't sit down and think it is time for the public to learn about my dissertation. So, what is your advice about choosing a moment or a topic, or like when is it time to let the world hear your voice, or how do you think about that?
I mean, I think that if you, so there are different things. One is that yes, you can be very timely when if current events relate to your research in some way, and then reach out and offer your opinion. But I also think when you're working on your dissertation and you realize, hey, this is a point that I really want people to know about, um, then you are at it like, yes, now everyone should know about my dissertation, and um, and I think that's an excellent time when you are really confident in what you have to offer. This is yeah, I guess I mean I would say like picking the right time is going to be both developmental for you when you think you are ready to say something, or opportunistic when something comes up in the world where you're invited or egged on by current events to go public.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? I sometimes hear from people, oh, that's all very well for you. Your research already connects to public events in lots of ways. And I think there
Mhm.
are some obvious points. Like um, if you are working on trade politics, it's going to be obvious why the news cycle might be something to which you could contribute. If you are working on a very obscure problem in theoretical physics, which has incredible meaning for sort of how we understand the world around us, but isn't something that the news media starts to talk to, it may be a longer route to figure out how to find your voice in the public or something like that. I don't know if this is a fair question or not, but do you have suggestions? What are some of the exercises or workshopping you can do? Because it might be that the person who is working on this obscure point in uh, astrophysics or something very, very technical in another field really does have a public voice. How do you go about finding that connection or weaving that thread?
Yeah, I mean, I think could certainly come from having those popular conversations around the dinner table or on public transit when you are learning what people see as interesting about what you are doing. But it can also just come from you realizing, wow, I made this really cool discovery. It's really important, and I want people to know about it.
Yeah.
And I understand it deeply in a way and can communicate the importance of it and your enthusiasm for it in a popular piece. Um,
Yeah. I also think too, this is where it's helpful to do that sort of work that feminist philosophy of science has always reminded us to do, and to start to situate ourselves as the researcher and the context in which we're doing the research in the room too. So if you think about the goal of sort of writing for the popular is to talk about your scholarly expertise in a way that interests you, so that it communicates what it was that grabbed you about it. That may involve putting you into the story in some way. Like, I have devoted my life to this. This is what it's like to be a researcher of this, or this is what it is. And I sort of feel like the attack on expertise in the world right now, and the attack on the idea of traditional expertise, sort of gives all of us a reason to have a platform to explain what it is to engage in advanced study of something in particular, to sort of tell the story of why expertise is still worth taking seriously in certain ways. And that can really connect almost anything any of us work on to public interest and to public advocacy too.
Yeah, you make a really good point, Alice, that in a lot of these written pieces that are very successful, there's a lot of first person narrative
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
them, in the magazine articles and essays that win prizes and get widely read. People are talking about why they cared, what happened in their lives to make them ask these questions, what their stumbling blocks were when they were moving forward to engage in their research, and how they won at the end of the day and made this great discovery, and why, what the implications might be down the road. They tell it as a story. And so thinking about narratizing your research in this way, I think it could be another really good method for knowing whether you're ready to take it public, or
Yeah.
have
Are you
something
ready
to
to
say.
put yourself in the story? It's true.
Are you
And I,
ready to tell a story about your personal trials and tribulations with your research?
And
Yeah.
actually, it's a good question to ask if you're ready to go public, because for many of us, sometimes myself included, the answer is no. And then we know. So, yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you.
If you aren't comfortable talking about the research, then doing print would make more sense than doing a podcast or anything where you were doing a live interview.
Yes.
Because every time I've been on any kind of a live interview system, they want to know all kinds of personal things about me. And sometimes it's very unexpected, and can lead to interesting places.
I bet. I imagine. Now we're all going to go look up your videos to see what you're talking about. Well, why don't
Mm.
we get to some tips and tricks here? So I have a list here that I prepared in my research, but I imagine that you have a lot to say as well, Kristen. So why don't we move through them, and I'll say a little bit about what I was thinking. The one for know your audience, I wanted to say I include for traditional media the interviewer and the news outlet in this. Know who's inviting you, do a little bit of research, find out what their angle is likely to be, what you think their agenda is going to be. Don't be afraid to ask follow-up questions about like why you were being invited, who else is being invited, what the context for the questions are going to be, what their goal in telling this story is, because it could be very different. I imagine for you, if you discovered you were suddenly on a hit piece of sort of like, why is this Ontario Institution Marine Line being attacked by animal rights activists, that would be very different than someone wanting to understand why we've misunderstood what it is to treat large marine animals the way we do.
Yeah, this is absolutely true and very important. So if you're writing an op-ed for a newspaper or a letter to the editor, like make sure you know the politics of the newspaper, that you've read the newspaper, pick the newspaper that represents what you want to be participating in. Um, if you're invited to be on a podcast, before you say anything, unless you already know the answer is no to begin with, go and look at some of the podcast interviews, see what this interviewer has done, who are they interviewing, what kinds of questions are they asking, and then decide if you want to be presented in that way, whether you like that kind of work that they're doing. Um, and the same when you choose say a magazine venue or something like that to publish in. Look and see what else they've been doing. What are they publishing? And that's going to give you a sense of the audience, because you are then reading, right, things that have been designed for a particular audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's really no right answer there apart from knowing your own comfort levels and what you're choosing to lift up and platform with your research. It might be you think, oh my goodness, this venue is opposed to everything I do. I cannot wait to get in there and really fight it out with them. And that might be who you are, and that's fantastic and phenomenal. Or I am going to be the voice, and if I can persuade even one person in this audience to change their mind about whatever it is, pipelines or something like that, then I'm happy to do it. But just know going in, don't So not all surprises are fun surprises.
That's right.
Um, I think the next really three or four we've really covered, which is just, you know, kind of do's and don'ts. On the do side, we have like provide context and be concrete. So situate your research. Don't assume people are automatically going to know, you know, the sort of specificities of your subdiscipline in some way, and be very concrete wherever you can, sort of giving applications, examples, clear language, whatever's possible. Try and do this without jargon, heavy formality, unfamiliar terms. But that doesn't mean sort of say whatever goes or be sloppy. I sort of have yes to research, no to a research paper. Like, you're not writing a research paper with 5 paragraphs and your thesis statement and your literature review and the sort of long wind up, but you do need to show that this isn't just an opinion you have or a point of view, that this is an informed claim that you are making based on research that you can draw people's attention to, or at least assert that you have done in some way. And I think that can be really important.
It's especially important when you're being interviewed. So if the Toronto Star calls you up and asks you for an interview, they're going to take one sentence. You might talk to somebody for half an hour and they will take one sentence. And it's a really good idea to be clear, what is the one sentence I want them to print in the paper? And know what that is, write it down, practice saying it, practice embedding it in the other questions, repeat it multiple times. And then if you do that, and it is a concrete, contextualized, jargon-free sentence, that's a sentence that they're going to publish in the paper. And then, yay, you did what you wanted to do. The same goes for often like radio interviews. You might be interviewed not live. And then, of course, they're going to be editing what you're saying. They're going to pick out the things that are the most exciting for listeners to hear. Sometimes that's not what you wanted if you don't practice saying the catchphrase
Yes,
that you really want them to come away with.
I couldn't agree more. I have such a history of not saying, of not having the thing I wanted to be published. Going back, I think, to my very earliest interviews, I always think, really? That was the one. And my very favorite experience are ones where I've had the luxury of a long form interview. I think there was once a CBC show that gave me sort of the luxury to kind of explain what I meant. And it's the only one I can bear to listen to ever, because it's not just exactly the wrong phrase out of context. So
Yeah,
absolutely, I get
exactly.
that.
Exactly. If you've got a long form interview or you're doing a podcast interview or an interview on the CBC with Matt Galloway, where you are going into the studio live and whatever you say is going to be in everybody's living rooms before you know it, it's really important to anticipate the kinds of questions you think they're going to ask and have answers to all of those questions so that you can just unpack them and you're not sitting there like, oh, wow, never thought about that, Matt. And everybody's listening to this. Like that is
The ums and ahs,
a high
yes.
pressure context, and one where it really pays to prepare, anticipate questions, and have very well worked out, almost memorized answers to the questions and memorized anecdotes you want to tell and stories about yourself to draw the listener in.
It's interesting, isn't it? We talked about the need to be sort of engaged and excited and authentic, and you have to balance that with actually having done a lot of preparation. Just try
Mhm.
and keep that thread of enthusiasm for this thing that you love so much. You've devoted your life to it, so that you can draw on these things without them feeling canned. So that you can keep the excitement that pulls you, that even though I think, and this is where the fact that many of us have experience teaching is so useful. I think teaching is maybe the best thing. You will come into a class, you will teach a lesson that you have taught 2 or 5 or 10 or 100 times, and each time you have to find that thing that makes you excited so that you can get the class excited. And I think holding on to that experience can be helpful for these. um,
Absolutely.
there's one last thing I want to draw attention to on this slide in particular, and that's sort of second from the bottom when we talk the fish hooks, having a hook. And I'm so sorry, fish hooks seem like a really thoughtless thing to have on a slide with an animal advocate. I apologize. But have a hook. And this is true for writing something, for making a point, and for being ready with your interview. So have the thing that grabs them, because that is the piece that they will pick up. The sort of the one line that will draw people in, get them recognizing this is a story worth telling. There are stakes here. I was doing some research on hooks and I learned that there's three typical kinds. Cannonball is just where you come in with the thesis and you give it to them. Everything you've understood about your dog is wrong. Or spiders have an inner life you wouldn't imagine, or something like that. You just sort of say it in the boldest way possible. That's the cannonball hook. The other is the exemplar hook. If you were doing a story on immigration, you might start and say, you know, Louisa has been living in Toronto for 40 years. For the first time this year, she discovered her status was unclear. There are 100 people like Louisa in your neighborhood, or something like that. You give an example that draws people in, that's compelling, and then you expand outwards. And then the other one is very easy, is the rhetorical question that you then answer. Have you, Siri, does my family love me? How many of us ask our AIs this question every day, or something like that? You give that sort of question and answer. These are formulaic. As you get better, Kristen will do much better ones in her interviews and her writing, and I'm sure soon many of you will. But if you're not sure, having a simple sort of formulaic hook can help you start to get a feel for what a hook is. But you want the thing that grabs the audience, and that's true in writing and in interviews.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
think
also true in your
especially
academic writing too.
it's true. It's true. I think it's especially true in writing, because with interviews, you're much more reactive to the kinds of questions that your interviewer is giving you. Um, but when you're writing, right, everybody could just turn the page or flip the screen, scroll to the next thing very, very quickly. And so if you don't in writing have something right away that grabs those eyeballs, then nobody's going to look at it. So it's the hook is essential when you're doing writing. I suppose if you're doing a TikTok yourself as well, like the first eyes on this material, if it's something new, should be something that's very yeah, very
Yeah.
exciting. I had never heard that Cannonball exemplar Q&A, but you got it, Alice. Like those are exactly the three ways in which people begin essays. Yep.
It made me wish we could go back and teach scholarship statement of interest sessions together again. Yeah, absolutely. So I really do want to leave time for questions. And as always, I am running out of time. So I want to flip, and this is going to feel like a bit of a quick pivot, because we've been talking so much about why you should do this, how to prepare, how great it's going to be, all the tips to make it successful. But I do want to spend just 5 minutes talking what to do if things go wonky. And that's basically because it's a big world out there. And as I said, I chose wonky because it's not just that things can go wrong, they can also go right in a way that sort of is overwhelming and surprising. So we know sometimes people go viral and gain a lot of popularity very quickly. Or you might be the voice that gets picked up, and suddenly you find yourself having staked a position in what's become a very controversial public debate. I mean, I think there is a time not so long ago where people working on childhood vaccinations did not imagine that they would be the most controversial thing sort of on the internet. But it also can be a very unpleasant experience. I've had very unpleasant experiences. I don't always love doing public scholarship as a result. And I will just be honest, I realized that for my personal disposition or whatever, that I am comfortable writing, I am comfortable engaging in some interviews, but I don't like media panels or debates, and I'm not going to do those. And I had to learn that for me. So you can get a hostile interviewer, you can get trolls in a comment section, you could even just get negative feedback from someone in your life. Your grandfather calls you and says, I'm really disappointed by what you said, or a respected elder and mentor criticizes what you wrote, or your thesis supervisor says, I can't believe you did that. This is not. So I wanted to take, or you might go wrong. You might make a public statement and realize you were wrong and it's out there, or something like that. These are all risks. And I think it's worth naming them and recognizing them, not to scare people away, because the reason to do risky things is because they are extraordinarily valuable and important and exciting and good. And all of you have taken risks by coming to graduate school. So I know you're up for a certain amount of risk. But I wanted to sort of ask you, Kristen, have things ever gone wonky for you when talking to the public? How did you handle it? What advice do you have?
Yeah, there are lots of different scenarios. And I think in the kind of scenarios you describe, a really good response if you're confronted with some unpleasantness is talk to York University. Their resources, they will help you if you feel like you're being bombarded. Yeah. The in the moment, also some of the emails that you might get from people aren't, mean or horrible, but you might be all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, I'm so excited. I want to talk to you about my theory about what you're working on." And if you get a lot of those, you might also feel overwhelmed and that you can't reply to all of them. And I think it's important to realize that you're not obligated to reply to every email that you get. Or you can just write, "Oh, thanks so much. I'd love to look at your idea sometime if I have time." But even if you don't reply, like you're not obligated. I've had people follow up with me and say, "Why didn't you answer my email?" That's when I really don't reply to them, because that doesn't respect that we're all very busy and it can take a long time to reply to things. The um, the Interestingly, when you're doing interviews and you get questions, that can also make things go wonky that you didn't expect. If somebody asks you a question that's kind of off the wall, or like they're trying to lead you to answer in a certain way, like they're trying to make a point, you don't have to answer that question they're asking. This happens all the time in interviews that the interviewee answers a different question. They say the thing they want to say to take back control of the situation. So don't feel forced to go down a path if you're not comfortable walking that path. You can say, "Oh, that's interesting, but what I really think would be useful to talk about is this," and then pivot to that other point. So
That's
yeah,
such good
all of these
advice.
things has
And it's so
happened.
hard for academics. We think we have to answer the question that was asked, but the first thing media training will teach you is don't do that.
That's
Yeah,
right.
sorry to jump in.
And then the last thing I'd say is you also are not obligated to read the comments on print media. If you don't want to engage with the debate, you can say your piece and then walk away and let other people have the debate. If you want to, of course, you can answer them, but there's no obligation to keep up with the public conversation after you've done a piece of public outreach.
I think that's really important. That's very, very good advice. I want to chime in with what Kristen said to say this is where your university is here for you. It's really important to ask for help. As with everything, start locally, start with your supervisor and committee or your graduate program, your GPD, or trusted profs and mentors or peers just for support and commiseration. But please keep in mind the Faculty of Graduate Studies as well. We have wellness and counseling services you can avail yourself of, but you can also reach out to FGS, to the Office of the Dean. We have supported students who have experienced public public backlash for their work or positions they've taken or public scholarship they've done. I have worked personally with students to make sure that their email address was protected, to make sure that they weren't in danger of doxing or anything like that. FGS can be a sort of pivot place to direct you to the right resources at York, whether that's UIT or the Center for Human Rights, Equity, and Inclusion, or other resources that may be of help to you to make sure that you, most importantly, first of all, feel safe and are safe. And second, have the comfort and the sense of security to be able to continue your scholarship with your own academic freedom and just to sort of workshop with you what happened, what went wrong, what went right, you know, maybe even point you to sort of a way in which this was really good to remind you to do self-care things like don't read the comments, have a folder where you put the emails, but just because someone took the time to write something doesn't mean that you owe them an answer or even to read it carefully. If it starts to feel abusive or threatening or anything like that, save it, keep a track, but you don't have to do that. We owe the public a lot because we're very lucky to be a publicly funded university. We do not owe a patient voice for every critique of everything they have to say. And I really, that's less important for me than it is for early career researchers than it is for graduate students. But you get to help yourself to that bubble most of all, and it's our job to help create that bubble for you. I also want to draw your attention to the York Supporting Scholars Scholarship Harassment website. You'll see it has all sorts of different kinds of support around research, teaching, personal safety, internet's online safety. Some of those are specific to faculty members, but others are for graduate students, and it directs you to resources that are available for graduate students in particular, most of which are at FGS. So let us help you at this point. You've gone out, you've done what you're supposed to do, which is to do great work and share it with the world. Let us help you if there's any blowback to that, please. I sort of hate ending on that negative point because I have to say, I have been, you know what, I'm going to end on a positive note. It's a personal anecdote that I've been wanting to tell Kristen, but I was at a holiday party over the break and I was telling someone at the holiday party that I was a philosophy professor. And she said, I've never understood philosophy, but I've been learning from philosophers on Instagram. And there's this one Canadian philosopher on Instagram who's taught me so much in these short, bite-sized pieces. And as she talked, I realized it was a former student of ours that she had been listening to, no connection whatsoever, who has been doing public philosophy on social media, such that I would get to go to parties and hear about it. So
That's very cool.
it was incredibly cool, and I was incredibly proud. And I just want to say, I know that if you decide to do this and pursue it, your teachers and mentors and former profs are going to be very, very proud of you as well.
Yeah.
So with
And
that,
you will have a lot of fun. It is so fun
it is
talking to
fun.
people about your research and seeing sometimes it's, hard to motivate yourself to do your research. There's nothing that gets you re-energized. Nothing better than getting you re-energized is having a conversation with someone who's really excited about what you're doing. So take advantage of the opportunities to talk about your research when you're invited to do it. You'll love it.
Absolutely. That I couldn't agree with more. Okay, we do have a couple of minutes for questions. And actually, Debbie, I think I can just see the questions, so I'm going to pull them out. The first question was actually about a book review. And that's such an interesting question because it's veering off of public and academic, but it's true. I suppose one of the things to do would be to look to review a popular book in your field or something like that. Kristen, do you have any experience with that?
I don't have experience with that, but I think that a popular book review, if you are invited to do it, or if you have a venue that's a more generalist venue, you could pitch a review of a book and the kind of angle that you take on that. Yeah, but reviewing academic books wouldn't really be speaking outside of the academic bubble. So if you're looking to
Mm-hmm.
reach out to people outside of academia, then yeah, it would be reviewing a popular book, a trade book, for a newspaper or some other sort of a more generalist publication, or on your
Yeah,
TikTok
that makes
or
sense.
Instagram.
Yeah, that's right. Hold them up and do it on your Instagram.
Mhm.
And actually, this actually ties into the next question because another guest has asked how a personal website can function to create an audience versus other kinds of platform. What is the role of a personal website in building a public profile or a brand or whatever?
I think the website is where you bring all of the public work that you do together with all the academic work that you do. So you're really building your persona. When people hear your name or see what you're doing and they want to know more, the first thing they do is Google you.
Yes.
And one of the top hits that they get is going to be your website, hopefully, because your website is where you control the narrative. And you put links to the things you want people to see and pictures that you want people to be looking at, and then using. If they talk about you, they'll use those pictures that you posted on your website. And rather than having letting someone else control the narrative. So I think it is really valuable, even in this day and age, to create a personal website where you post both your academic publications and presentations and activities, short snippets of your research descriptions that would be very easily accessible. Also, because newspapers are going to Google people when they need someone to talk about the gay penguins at the zoo, for example. I get these calls from the Toronto Star or whatever, and they want a comment on something that I'm only tangentially related to, and they find me by Googling. So that's a really good way to get found.
And you do have a very lovely website, I have to say. I was recently on it. It's great. Mine, on the other hand, is 10 years out of date. So I'm writing that down as a to do as well. And then we have a question about reaching out to schools in particular, and sort of how to do that. And my this way is going to vary widely. As with anything, one really good way to know about how to reach someone is if you have a connection of some kind. But otherwise, for the TDSB anyway, I would suggest reaching out to central offices unless you have a different answer, Kristen. And
No,
not
I
every
think
school
that's
is going to have every. There are some teachers who are on social media that you could contact and sort of say, "Oh, you are posting about being a social studies teacher in a Toronto high school. I work on this aspect of Canadian history. If you're ever interested, I would be happy to do something." And again, you might get an answer, you might not, but
Mhm.
it's again
That's right.
getting used to know. inoculating yourself against the pain of no is one of the best things you can do as an academic. And the more practice you get early on, the less time you'll waste later. So I cannot recommend it enough. Well, I think I had one last question that I wanted to ask you, Kristen, which is what has been your favorite public experience? What's been the real highlight for you? Can you share anything about that?
I mean, I have to say, I was completely thrilled when Alan Alda's office sent me an email, and I was like, "Wait, you mean from MASH and from all of those animal and nature specials? He wants to talk to me?" I was absolutely honored by that, and it was really fun to talk to, a public persona who I've known since like seen on TV since I was a child, and see that he's very interested in, right, in this case, it was the spider in his room and whether it was conscious. So it was just a really lovely, casual conversation with someone whose work always admired, and I felt like I was just having tea with, with this very cool, famous person.
Oh,
That
I
was
love
really
that.
fun.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. As everyone can see, I have posted a final slide here that have further resources for aspiring public researchers. But what I want to highlight is you'll see many of these are from York, which I think really highlights what Kristen's example has just shown, which is this is another form of knowledge creation. Engaging with the public is making knowledge, and it's bringing together people from very different walks of life who do share a concern and a commitment for exactly the kind of things that have driven you in your research. So don't think of this as a side project or a hobby. See this as part of your calling as an academic, as a scholar, as a researcher, as a graduate student, and take a look at some of these resources that are out there at York. So Innovation York has a knowledge mobilization unit that is specifically about what it sounds like, mobilizing knowledge, getting it out there. York U's Media Creation Lab has tips for starting a podcast if you decide you don't want to go on any of the ones that are out there. The university libraries have put together recommendations for how to share your work online or get it online and some sort of risks and benefits to different platforms. And then I have included the scholarship harassment resource again, because I think that's really important. But I don't just want to draw your attention to stuff that's available at York. I've included sort of an article about why become a public scholar from a really amazing public scholar, Angel M. Jones, who talks a lot about how to bring your own trajectory as a scholar, particularly if you're from an underrepresented background, into your work as a public figure and researcher. I've included some advice on public writing from U of T, and then a series of different sources from the UK, from the US, and from Europe about how to engage the media, why to engage the media, and some more detailed versions of the kind of tips and tricks that Kristen and I were giving you as well. So hopefully among these resources, you have everything you need to get started on your public scholarship journey. And hopefully in talking to us, we've given you a sense of why you might want to do this and what can be really valuable and important in doing it. I just want to say thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us today. This was a very genuine pleasure. And thank you to all of you for coming as well. It's lovely to see that we continue to get a good audience for these. Please do stay tuned. We have more scholarly skills coming up the rest of this academic year. And later on in the spring, we'll be announcing our full suite of workshops for subsequent academic years. As always, this recording will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel next week. You can find the whole archive of Scholarly Skills webinars, which is now about 8 or 10 of them, I think, on our website and on our YouTube channel, where you can continue to access them or share them publicly for free as well. So please do stay in touch, and thank you so much for being part of Scholarly Skills. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alice.